The third thing is that we have about 20 minutes, because I'm going to let us run a few minutes over. And I'd like to take the first little bit of that to give the panelists a chance to discuss any questions that have come up as a result of the very interesting presentations. It's always remarkable to me how you can put 5 people together to talk about the same topic. You get 5 very, very different takes. Perhaps you would like to discuss among yourselves, and then we'll open it up for a few minutes for questions. When we do open it for questions, we have a couple of people who are poised with wireless mics, and we'd like you to raise your hand. We'll bring a microphone over that so that we can capture your questions and the answers for posterity. So first to the panel.
Can I play the devil's advocate? Oh. Mara's advocate? Yeah, I find a problem with the Dharma theory. Okay, we speak about feeling, perception, volition, greed, hatred, delusion as dharmas, separate things. Now, it's as if I were to say, I have my arm here, I raise it up, put it out evenly, put it down, or maybe put it at a diagonal. So perhaps I were to say each of these things is a different entity, a different dharma. There's the dharma of the straight arm, dharma of the arm that's straight out, dharma of the arm that's down. Sometimes it seems to me that the Abhidharmikas are doing the same thing with the mind. You know, turning distinct mental events or mental experiences into individual things, which are then seen as clustered together into a complex, which is called, well, a Chittupada, an arising of consciousness. And so to understand the mind, one has to, a little bit like a biologist looking through a microscope and dissecting a cell into the cell membrane, the cytoplasm, the nucleus, the other parts of the cell. I mean, this is sort of a question or an argument from
I don't know you're going to find anyone who's going to argue with you.
I mean, just the observation, though, I mean, it seems to me, I mean, that's obviously true. I do think that there are some places where they almost realize that they're doing that, and they realize it's a bit of a problem. I mean, in certain, you know, I'm thinking of some of the similes that they use. Well, you know, they say things like, well, only a Buddha can do this, and it's as if the Buddha someone went out into the sea and plucked out the water and sipped it and said, this comes from the Yamuna, this comes from the Ganges, or whatever. So they realize that, so it's, although the theory is still there, there's perhaps sometimes a kind of acknowledgement that it's slightly artificial. I was just a comment on Bob's observation about non-meditators being the authors of these texts. I mean, first of all, it seems to me that there is a bit of a problem with the category of meditator and non-meditator. I mean, within the tradition. I mean, it's one of those words that we use in English that doesn't have a very clear correspondent in any of the languages, it seems to me, traditionally. I mean, the other thing might be that they might say it doesn't matter because it's a collective tradition where they are representing a tradition. I mean, they don't want to talk precisely about their own experience, as it were.
That is, I mean, I mentioned, I don't want to get too argumentative here, but there is a tendency, it starts in the late 19th and early 20th century China. You have this tremendous interest in Yogacara, and particularly the kind of late Yogacara, which is very Abhidharmic. And the reason is they saw this as a kind of empirical science which could trump Western science because Western science didn't have the means to empirically examine the mind and experience. And so there was great excitement that this would be a kind of response to the kind of the fear of being colonized by Western science. We had the resources. We have our own indigenous science. And it looks a bit naive to us now, but I do think that the tendency to want to root, everything in the Buddhist tradition, to always want to trace it back to meditative experience, there's a certain kind of scientism in that what we want it to be, we want it to be empirical. And somehow, to us, and this is just I think it's an odd bias at this moment in America, that if it's the result somehow of immediate experience, better yet the immediate experience of an enlightened being, that somehow that's better than really thinking it through. And what's curious is, the Buddhists saw the problems with both of those options. And they have very powerful critiques of both of those, both the danger of trusting one's own experience, the danger of trusting somebody else's experience, and also the kind of the danger of trusting one's own intellectual, analytical, and thinking processes.
There's one other use of the Abhidharma I should mention that one wouldn't know about unless one were either a Thai monk or dead. And I don't see any Thai monks here, unless maybe there's former Thai monks without their robes. And I don't see any dead people here. But the first part of the first book of the Abhidharma, the Pali Abhidharma Pitaka, this is the Matika of the Dhamma Sangani, is used to recite at funerals. So whenever a Buddhist person dies in the Thai tradition, the monks congregate and they recite the Matika of the Dhamma Sangani. And when I was staying in a Thai temple in Singapore, 2001, whenever in the evening somebody would come knocking at my door and say, there's a funeral, I think, oh no. This means at least 3 days, perhaps even 7 days, I have to recite the Matika of the Dhamma Sangani. But the reason how the Abhidharma came to be used for that purpose struck me as very curious. Through inquiry, what I found out was that, according to the Theravada tradition, when the Buddha's mother had passed away when he was just 7 days after he was born, so later, after his enlightenment, the Buddha went to the Tusita heaven or Tavatimsa heaven to recite the Abhidharma for the benefit of his mother. And so it becomes a way of creating spiritual benefits for a deceased person.
So there's that. Okay. We have time for a few questions from the audience. We have Pauline over on this side and Renata over on this side holding microphones. Here's a question right here to start.
So I was in India at a Theravadan ceremony in December, and not being very familiar with the Theravadan tradition, I would meet sometimes a monk or a teacher who would say, oh, I have a degree, or this person has a degree, or is a doctor, not like a medical doctor, obviously. And so sitting here, I kind of have two questions. One is this, this elaborate Abhidharma, a lot of what that degree would be? I wondered, what are they studying when they have this degree? It's not in science, or I didn't know. I don't know if anybody in the panel knows. And if we know that, then do they combine practice with study in studying the Abhidharma? Because that would be relevant to this question, I would think.
Apparently nobody knows. I did hear a story.
I don't know. I just don't know. Yeah.
Okay. I did hear a story not long ago that there was a conference, an academic conference in one of the Theravadan countries, and a monk got up and said, and said, if you don't study the Abhidharma, you cannot get enlightened. And that was apparently a very controversial statement in that conference, and occasioned a lot of discussion. So that's at least tangentially relevant.
Are you sure they're not talking about having, monks may have all sorts of degrees. They might have a degree in engineering or... I mean, there were Theravada monks. From what country?
Oh gosh, one person I'm thinking of is from Bangladesh, and I have a little card, he's Dr., But it's like, this was told to me that, no, this person has a degree in context of Dharma, and that it was very, this was to be respected, which of course it would be, but.
I suppose it depends a little bit in which Theravada country they were educated, I suppose. But if it's Abhidharma, it could well be Burma or something like that. And I think there is a tradition in Burma of combining Abhidharma practice with, Abhidharma study with meditation practice.
There is, in contemporary times, absolutely. I think the classic example, I think it's Tongpulu Sayadaw, who is famous as having been just an illiterate farmer who was given a very simple practice.
No, it wasn't Tongpulu Sayadaw. This was
Weibo, who becomes
Weibo.
he becomes fully enlightened,
Yeah.
and then according to the hagiographies, he's examined on Abhidharma, and he's recognized as an Abhidharma specialist.
Yeah.
But this happened entirely through. Is it Weibo Sayadaw? I don't think it's
No,
Weibo
it's not.
Sayadaw. It'll come.
Yeah.
It's almost there.
He's
it's
in the
almost
book called Living Buddhist Masters.
Yeah. In any case, Sumlun Sayadaw.
Sunglu, that's it. Yeah.
But the point of this is not so much that this proves that Abhidharma is empirically based in experience. It's that this really does capture the moment, in the early 20th century in Burma, where, in a sense, scientism has captured the imagination of this Theravada revival. And I think this is well out of my specialty, but I suspect that such a story would not have made much sense prior to the modern period. The idea that a meditator would just spontaneously be able to generate all of the categories out of the Abhidharma out of his his meditative experience, I think would have struck people as very odd.
I'm not sure that that's the case, because there are stories that come in, like the Dhammapada commentary about certain monks who were originally very unlearned, very illiterate. Well, they were all illiterate at that time, literally. But okay, very unlearned. They had a lot of difficulty in learning, but then they practiced very diligently, and they achieve arhatship together with what are called the patisambhida jnanas, which is the ability to analyze in extensive detail any statement of the Buddha, to draw out all of the implications, to explain the Dhamma in extensive detail, everything precisely correct.
Another question?
I have a question regarding relationship, or let's say comparison which can be made between Western phenomenology and Buddhism or Abhidharma phenomenology, if possible to say, because varieties of Western phenomenology, they also rectify experience, and phenomenological framework is used nevertheless for translation of categories of Buddhism into Western philosophical understanding. So anything, if you can say anything in that venue, would be great.
So this is about the rectification of experience in the Western tradition. So Colette, perhaps you'd like to say something about it?
I didn't hear the question clearly.
Oh, the question had to do with the Western phenomenological tradition, because it was also founded on the premise that one could experientially rectify, or one could rectify experience and build knowledge on that foundation. Is that close enough? Is that a close enough summary?
And so, in other words, would I view Abhidharma that way, or the connections, or Between Abhidharma and phenomenology?
we're-
Or,
So complete that question. Put that in the form of a question again,
Well,
if you
it
could.
just one of your topics was listed on the website, actually referred to Husserl's phenomenology, I think. And then there is, of course, work of Gunther. It's not Abhidharma, but let's say it's Vajrayana. But still, it's more and more, there are, I think, more and more attempts to use Western phenomenological framework for understanding quote-unquote maps or in Buddhism specifically. So I'm asking for your position or evaluation of such attempts.
I guess, but I would hope that some of you might have views on this, but my initial response to this is that I think it's more, or I find it, what should we say, in a sense, more useful to use phenomenology or to conceive of phenomenology as an approach which would have analogs in Buddhism rather than to take the particular products of a specific phenomenological analysis and attempt to correlate the products of that analysis with the products of Buddhist analysis.
Yeah.
So but we might have differing views on that. Yeah.
Well, okay, I shall speak from experience.
There you go.
No, but I have to qualify that by saying I shall speak from my very, very limited experience. A few months ago, I was reading a book with the title Phenomenology of Mind. Sean Gallagher and forgotten the other name. Dual author book.
Dan Zahavi.
Sorry?
Dan Zahavi.
Yeah, okay. And as I was reading through the book, I thought, gosh, yes, here are certain connections that you can make.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it always seemed to me that I was troubled, because the trouble is phenomenology is a particular tradition, and it's growing out of a particular tradition within Western philosophy. And while there are, it seems, kind of interesting points of contact, I felt, I don't really grasp this phenomenology system well enough and understand all the things, because I sort of felt, I can see connections, and then I felt, well, actually this doesn't quite fit. So it seems to me that there is a sort of a potential for interesting kind of dialogue in some way, just to kind of compare notes, because it makes two sides kind of clearer, to kind of compare and contrast. But yeah, that's maybe.
Oh, I just have strong opinions that that particular enterprise is deadly. That you're, well, first of all, just as there isn't one Buddhism, and that there are parts of the Abhidharma that you can, that either, who knows whether they were experiential when they can be turned into something experiential and used that way, which is what I was talking about, but there are many different takes on it. Likewise, phenomenology, I mean, nothing could be more different than Husserl and Heidegger. Heidegger was arguing against Husserl, and when people say phenomenology, they mix the terminology and create what you create when you do that. And furthermore, that you're taking two arcane systems that have their own jargon and think that if you try to translate one of them into the other, that you're going to get something clearer. You don't. All you get is papers that you can publish that will further confuse things. And finally, what's called a phenomenological analysis in psychology is ridiculous. It's normally that you interview people and you summarize what they said, and you call it a phenomenological analysis. And I think phenomenology is very interesting in its own right, and you can study the authors, but you're not solving problems by using their jargon. And I can be wrong.
The other thing I'd just throw in, is that classical phenomenology, I'm thinking about here about Husserl, was an attempt to do, it was coming out of the same scientism. They were going to bring a particular kind of very systematic thought and experimentation to the study of philosophy and metaphysics. So they were going to reject all of classical metaphysics and just build up the world on the basis of a very careful analysis of first-person experience. And what they quickly did, as Eleanor pointed out, they quickly developed systems and a very arcane language in which the disciples of any one teacher could never agree on what their teacher meant by the kind of key terms. So I think the reason they look similar is because the impulse behind them, at least as presented in a lot of contemporary approaches, are similar. And that's to argue that phenomenology is a rigorous scientific method that can be applied first person. And that's what we have in Buddhism.
Oh, and that in Husserl, that you were bracketing the world. So you're going to examine consciousness in this systematic way without reference to anything else. It's sort of in a vacuum. This is what he was
But
trying to do.
don't forget that after years and years of these extensive Cartesian meditations, Husserl finally arrived at the concept of something that he called the life world, in which all of us had been living during the 40 years he was writing his books.
Let me, I'm going to end that there, but just with another plug, I suppose. There's another organization here at Mangalam Centers called the Center for Creative Inquiry, and in June we're going to be holding a conference on first-person methodologies in the study of consciousness, and one of the people attending actually is Nathalie de Praz, who is a leading Husserl scholar and a meditator. I don't think she'd call herself an Abhidharmika. I've been thinking about the possibility of organizing some sort of public event. It's a closed conference, but maybe something will happen. So yet another reason to sign our mailing list. Okay, we're going to close it there. As a reminder, we are going to be having a very nice spread downstairs. We invite you all to stick around and enjoy that. So again, thank you very much to the panel, and thank you for coming.
Thank you.